matching whatever you want. There's a huge literature about that. But these models are used with aggregate shocks following Crossan and Smith numerical procedure. So on top of that, so we are able to match some aspect of the time series with aggregate shocks. Okay, good. This being said, we know very, very little about those environments, about the distortions, about how to think about optimal policies in Crossan and Smith's Bewley-Yagleri model. So the state of the literature is that we do lots of policy analysis, for instance, monetary policy, fiscal policy, but we do not really know what are the optimal tax on capital, optimal tax on labor, optimal public debt in those environments. So there's a huge literature about optimal fiscal policy with representative agent or a small amount of agents, but there's nothing with aggregate shocks. And for deep reason, I will argue, is that these models are approximated, so it's very hard to think about optimal policy when you solve for the equilibrium with some aggregation procedure. So what we do in the paper is that we try to provide a framework to solve this problem. So to define optimal policy in an environment with incomplete markets with aggregate shocks. Okay? So the key construction is that we will provide a finite state space representation of any incomplete insurance market economies. And I will spend some time, that's key. So because of that, we will be able to apply and to derive optimal fiscal policy over the business cycle in a model with all the standard features. Okay? So what we will do is that, okay, take the environment by Crossan and Smith, capital moving around with TFP shock. And in this environment, we introduce the state, which has distorting tax on labor, on capital, and public debt. And we ask, in Crossan and Smith, how should the state adjust all these instruments in the business cycle to optimize welfare? So that's the problem we want to solve, and at this point, it's impossible to solve this problem. So we provide the framework to think about that. So there's other paper in the literature studying distortion in incomplete insurance market economies, either without aggregate shocks or with aggregate shocks. The recent paper by Bandari, Evans, Golosov, and Sargent, with related. I will speak about this paper later in the presentation. What they do is different from what we do, and I think that it's very interesting to contrast their result with ours. So, what is the key idea? It's very simple. Is consider incomplete insurance market economies. So we know that agents face different history of shocks, and because of that, there are different wealth. And we know from Bewley, Oppenheim, Prescott, that we put the wealth distribution as a state variable. And we do it recursively. With aggregate shocks, we do not know if there's a recursive structure yet. But what we do, and we study this with recursive shock. Okay. So what we do in the paper is that, okay, step back, think in the sequential representation. Think about the histories of idiosyncratic risk. So what we do is that we compare all history of agents, and we construct an equilibrium where only the last n period for any n you choose matter for the equilibrium. So we go back in the space of histories, and we truncate histories for the last n periods. And we construct the equilibrium, and this is a key part of the paper. So doing that, we have a finite number of histories to follow. And a finite number of histories, we can use the apparatus, and the one we use is Albert and Ramon, recursive contract apparatus. So we solve for the optimal contract with a finite number of histories as a constraint. So the paper is, another title would be Marcet and Marimon in Crossan and Smith. That's different with lots of names. So why is this framework interesting? Because of 5 properties that I will show you. First, we are kind of precise in the theory of the truncation. So we will show that the truncation is the allocation of a family head, a constraint planner. This will generate my truncation. So centralized truncation. We will decentralize it with a transfer scheme and show you that this can be decentralized. And it's useful for the third point. We will show we have a convergence proof. As the truncation tends toward infinity, you look more and more period in the past, you converge to the true Biot model. That's intuitive in a sense, but we have a proof, and there's some economics which is interesting. So because of that, we have a finite number of histories, possibly large, but finite. Actually, finite is close to 1. So we can use Marset and Marimon to derive what we call the Lagrangian approach, to derive results with Lagrange coefficient moving around. With Lagrange coefficient and playing with that, we derive some new, I think new, so I will analytical results about optimal taxation in this setup. And we have a characterization of the optimal capital tax. The optimal, which is an additional result compared to Ayagari 95 about positive capital tax in this environment. We have a further characterization, which is, you will tell me, a little bit deeper. To anticipate the result is that capital tax will be proportional to the Lagrange coefficient on the credit constraint. When credit constraints are binding, capital tax will be positive in this economy. When credit constraints are not binding for anyone, capital taxes will be 0. And I will try to make it intuitive. And the last point is that all of this apparatus you can simulate very easily with a perturbation method using DYNAR, because we have finite number of agents, and DYNAR can handle until 10,000 equations. So we can use the DYNAR at this point to simulate all of that.
So the reason you want these fast shocks is because you want to express the Lagrange multiplier and state variables in a different way, or because you want to express the distribution of agents in a different way?
Second one. I want a fast shock to have a deep thinking about the distribution and the lack of insurance to get precautionary saving for agent according to history, and time-varying precautionary saving with aggregate shocks. And to see all the planners should react to time-varying precautionary saving in this setup. Okay, good. So there's a lot of literature behind, so let me skip a little bit the literature to go to the contribution. So the environment, in 2 slides, just to lay down the notations. The key part will be the truncated representation. The recursive, the Ramsey thing with some analytical result and numerical application later. So good. Let's move on. The environment is roughly Crossell and Smith, capital, accumulation, and so on, with a fiscal structure. So it's close to Ifcott, some of Jonathan Ifcott papers. So let me lay down notations. So there are unit mass of agents with a discount factor beta, which is the same for all agents in this setup. They maximize the utility function on consumption and labor. We take here GHH utility function to have no wealth effect on the labor supply.
Why?
Because
Why that's going to play an important role?
not at all. The result does not depend on that. And actually, Albert and they have a paper which show that when you take a wealth effect, it affects the result. Here, it simplifies the analytics a little bit, but nothing deep of that.
The problem is it doesn't look anything like the cross-section. So to the extent that I'm interested in cross-sectional observations of consumption, labor supply, wage rates, things like that.
Okay, so we will speak about that. My feeling is that actually looking at the quantitative models, the models which is the most able to reproduce the cross-section of consumption, wealth, and income is Ifcott 95, which is using this utility function. So, but it's a quantitative issue. So let's take it as a simplification here, nothing deep here. I can use any utility function. Okay, on top of that, agents have different productivity level, capital E. Okay, either they are very productive, and their productivity is theta, or not productive at all. And we had another state, which is unemployment, where they have a own production, just to have a general setup. Okay, so the risk is, on top of that, this idiosyncratic risk will move away. And there's an aggregate shock, which is denoted by ST, which is the first order Markov process. And this aggregate shock can affect the transition matrix for the idiosyncratic risk. In recession, you are more likely to stay unemployed. In boom, less likely. So this is captured by this dependence. Okay, so agents are maximizing this object. They maximize intertemporal welfare. They have a labor in all, and this is their budget constraint in all period. So this is the labor income, the real wage, productivity, labor supply, labor income possibly, past financial income, possibly a transfer from the state, and with that, they consume and save. Okay, but quite standard. One point here, just for the notation, here RT is a post-tax return, just to simplify, okay? So RT will be the market return corrected by the distorting taxes that I will introduce in a second. So when there are nothing, no tilde in particular, is a post-tax return. Good, that's the agent, very standard thing. The production side, constant return production function that depends on capital installed one period before labor supply, total labor supply in efficient unit, and possibly the aggregate state because it may affect FP. So the depreciation rate is within the function f. So it's net of depreciation, okay? So the market return on capital R tilde is the marginal productivity of capital and productivity of labor. And you see that for people is what they get from the market corrected by the proportional tax on income. Okay, so this is my tax structure, which is a distorting tax on capital and labor. Okay, so the state has to finance the public spending G, which will be constant, just to balance things. And possibly he has to finance a lump sum to any agent. So this one possibly can generate a positive transfer to any agent. And how does it finance it? With these distorting taxes and with possibly a one-period debt.
So why do you need these lump sum transfers? I mean, take the distribution seriously and up with lump sum transfers.
Okay, that's a good question. So
Is it deductible?
no, and even worse than that, actually in equilibrium, the lump sum transfer will be zero. We show that the planner does not want to transfer resources to agent because it would raise a distortion in the economy. So it's
But it's going to be
That's
distributed
unlikely,
poor
right?
guys.
not in
Access to
equilibrium.
lump sum transfers, the planner usually really likes those.
You will see.
You know, guys lump sum,
I,
lump sum taxes.
yes. No. That's
Is it a quantitative result?
yes.
Do you
It
have a
is.
sense in which what these guys are saying is?
It's quantitative.
Take the
No.
following stochastic process. Suppose that there are two types of agents. One type of agent is always unemployed. Another type of agent is always employed.
Yes. The
Now, are you
process.
saying in that world
No.
there's a zero?
It's a quantitative thing. In your world,
So it's
the
so your
persistence.
statement is it's approximately zero in the quantitative version of your model?
No.
It's exactly zero? Or
No, what I say is that in this setup, in general equilibrium, the planner would like a lump sum tax, not a lump sum transfer. It's the same. Look at Bandari, Golosov, Lucas. Sorry.
No,
They want a lump sum tax.
That's not necessarily true. That's what I'm saying.
It's
Is it a theoretical
No,
result or
no.
It's
It's a quantitative one.
So if it's quantitative,
And-
the statement has got to be it's approximately zero or something.
No, you will see. It will be at the corner. And I will show you the first order condition to determine the lump sum transfer. And I think the theory will help to do that. So my claim that it's zero, it's a quantitative, definitely quantitative thing. It's not a theoretical one. In there's a world, the one you described, where full persistence of status, where you would use this thing.
Full persistence, zero G.
Sure.
So
So
just
it can't
why
be a
don't you-
theoretical result.
It's not a theoretical result.
Why don't you take these away from your slide and say?
In the because
I mean, if you set
Okay.
it equal to zero,
Because the point is that Bandari, Golosov, Lucas do that, and they have some result, and I discuss this. So that's only within this literature, but everything will be fine without it. It would simplify.
So what about government debt? How come government debt is risky here? Or like, how should I think about that? Government debt is a piece of paper that says, I'm going to pay you the marginal return to capital.
Let me introduce the government debt in a second.
Like you were saying, you already introduced it. It's got the the same return as capital.
Of course
Yes.
it's risky, because the return on capital is risky.
Yeah, yeah.
Just net inflation in the model.
No, there's ST, there's shocks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm asking, how come government debt is risky?
Because,
It's-
because marginal target capital fluctuates over time.
That's, you will see. The assumption is the following one. It's a simplified assumption, and I borrow it from IFCOT. You might want, okay, I introduce a stock on capital and government debt. In this case, I would add two assets. Here, I make the two assets perfectly substitute in the portfolio of agents. That's my simplification assumption here, which is the one standard in this literature to avoid additional friction, which would be time-varying portfolio choices across type of assets. Okay, so the question I ask is, okay, good. How should distorting taxes on capital labor vary with ST? So how can we think about this thing? At this point, this is very hard to do because those tools are very collinear. So computationally, you cannot do that. It's very tough. You can do different things. There are lots of things you can do with computers, but this is tough. So this is what we do. So that's the key part to generate the truncation. So key theoretical part. After, the contract theory, which will be a little bit involved, but more known. Okay, good. Choose N. The number of periods that you will consider in your economy. N is a parameter. It's not an equilibrium object, it's a parameter. N can be 10, 100, 1000. Okay, so any agent has a history ENT in period T. He is in ET today, and this is the history. This is the assumption. So let me introduce the metaphor, so it's hard to swallow, and then I will make the economics after. So there are lots of islands in the economy. And each island corresponds to one given history. So you have an history, and you have to go to the island which corresponds to your history. Okay? So there are lots of islands, and agents, they face idiosyncratic risk in all periods, so their history is moving. They have to go to the island which corresponds to their history. And when agents have to go to the corresponding island, they take their wealth with them in their pocket. Okay? So that's a technology constraint. It's not a choice. They cannot steal the wealth from others before they leave. It's their own wealth that they are taking on with them. Good. For instance, if I consider n equals 3 and 2 states, employed and unemployed, there would be 8 islands, 2 power 3, and an agent which is unemployed, which is finding a job, so has to go to this island, is employed, and he was unemployed the 2 periods before. So he goes from this island to this island with his wealth with him. Okay? Okay, that's the first part. So think about this as an extension of the Lucas 90 island metaphor with lots of islands corresponding to lots of histories. Good, that's the first part. Second part, there's a family head, call it a quasi-planner if you want, and this guy, he loves all agents in the economy, all agents in all islands. He loves them. And he will maximize the welfare of the whole agent on all islands. This is a planner, so this guy will allocate resources within each island. So in each island, he will say, okay, you will consume that, you will work that, you will save that, facing the credit constraint. So he can choose what to do in any island. But he cannot transfer wealth across island. He's missing a tool. Maybe he would like to transfer wealth from a poor island to a rich island. He cannot do that. But he can force agents from one island to save a lot in case they go to a poor island the next period. So this is a very clever central planner. So my quasi-planner is doing this. He's maximizing the welfare of the economy on all islands, taking into account the size of the island. He's knowing the budget constraint of agent on any island. And this is the beginning of period wealth in the island. And this guy knows that because people will move across island, wealth will move across island according to the probability that agents move across island. Okay? So very intelligent guy. So look at this problem. This is concave, all of that are linear constraints. So the first order conditions are easy to derive. Okay, concave, linear, there's no issue about complex non-convexities. So doing that, you can derive the first order condition, and the magic thing is that you get exactly the same first order condition as in Crossan and Smith. So this is the marginal utility of consumption for agents with this history. Beta 1 plus R, the expected marginal utility of people moving to the next history that is consistent with their story. The same for the labor supply, the same for budget constraints. So this representation gives me exactly the same first order condition, but with a truncation in the space of histories. Okay?
First order conditions might be the same.
Correct.
Suppose n was extremely large. I'm right, the distribution of consumption here is going to look like a represented agent economy, not the economy with idiosyncratic shocks.
So when n is large, is that you consider a lot of periods in the past, so there are lots of islands.
No, I know, but let's say that it also has something else, which is n being large also means, doesn't it also mean that the set of people who can move is correspondingly reduced?
No. No, because there are a lot of islands, and you go closer and closer to the true Biolay model. The true Biolay model is n equal infinity. And you correspond to go to... But to answer this issue, that's why we work on the convergence proof. To make intuitive that n tends toward infinity, you converge to the true Biolay model. So I will, in a second, make the convergence proof. So what is the trick here is that we use extensively the law of large number. So the share of people moving from one island to the next island is, so this is a population share, which is deterministic for the planner, is the same thing that the idiosyncratic probability on this island for people to switch to the other story. So the key trick is the extensive use of the law of large number, which generates the same, in a continuum, we generate the same first order condition. So now, is it a consistent representation? The answer is yes, based on one assumption that I want to make clear to answer Sherry's point. So let me make it intuitive. So I will be a little bit fast on that because it's a little bit technical, the proof. So, but let me sketch.
You have a planar problem with certain weights. The optimum of that is the incomplete market equilibrium.
Yes.
In the limit when n goes to infinity.
Yes.
Usually we don't get that. So what's the trick here?
So the weights, see that the weights are exactly.
That you put the weights the right way.
Yes, they are exactly the population share.
How can you do that? Because that depends a lot on the asset that people can trade.
Don't think so. My assumption is that.
Yeah. So what I mean is, usually the competitive equilibrium of capital markets depends on a bond or a stock or whatever.
Yes.
The asset.
Yes.
And therefore, whatever is the equivalent optimal planar problem that gives you that equilibrium will have to change depending on what's the asset. So what was the trick here?
The trick here, I think.
So let me put it another way. If you, instead of putting this asset, like you put these bonds, you would have put whatever, defaultable bonds or stocks or whatever, or capital or whatever.
It would work.
This trick would not have worked.
It would work. It is working as well.
So what would you do it?
This trick does not depend on the market structure. You can, here is one asset, but you can as many assets as you want. It is not. The point is that here, the planner weight.
You must change the S.
But
you must change something.
No. What's changing is what would change. What is my clicker? Okay. What is changing?
Can you go back to the programming problem?
Yes.
And that'll explain what Marcel and I are thinking.
No. Let me. here, the weight is the size of the island. And this is the number of people in this island. For instance, if people are employed for a long period of time, the size of the island where people are employed will be big. Lots of people will be on this island.
So I have to know the distribution of wealth.
No,
Distribution of wealth.
of idiosyncratic shock. The wealth is there.
It's a different way of describing it. I'll tell you what people are confused about. You are explicitly not writing this problem down recursively. This
Correct.
is only being done as a date zero problem. If n equals infinity, this model is exactly Truman's or Rao's model for Salzman. There is no difference.
Yes.
The only thing he is saying is that what the planner is not allowed to do is figure out what your history of shocks was before n. But then how does the planner know what your asset levels are? That's, I think, what Albert is worried about.
Because,
In that problem, he's got to know what your asset levels
yes,
are going to be.
but the planner,
Assume about
Yeah, I think that's the, I may be misunderstanding, I think that might be the approximation error by having limited n, is that on each island, the level of assets will be changing.
But how is the
period by
planner?
period.
The
Let-
planner is supposed to be forecasting that.
Yes,
Otherwise he can't solve
but
that.
look at that.
How does he forecast? No.
That-
How does he forecast?
that's the key thing. And that's why
Okay,
the share of the asset,
So that's what it is.
so that's, it answers part of the thing. Here is the law of motion of the quantity of asset. If you have multiple assets, you will have multiple law of motion with the same structure. So what is the structure? Here, assume that, as I said, these guys are unemployed. And this, okay, they save at the end of the period, they save this amount. Okay? And the planner understands that
No, that's not the only thing.
Let me-
What's the initial condition?
whatever you want.
Let me ask you differently. When I look at that equation, that tells me, so it's, I think the way you were trying to explain it may help people. What you're assuming is that every time somebody moves into an island, he pools the assets that he has with everybody else.
Exactly.
Co-
There's some
That
people that
island.
had 0,
Yes.
0, 0 and had a 1 before, and some people 0, 0, 0 that had a 0 before. Too bad.
They have the same answer.
Yes.
That's, I think, the key assumption.
That's true.
That's what I
May-
think it's worthwhile emphasizing.
yes, maybe I was not
You're
clear.
now the same.
Exactly.
And
We're
as
now
n
the
goes
same.
to infinity, you're having less mismatching of people that actually were different, and now they're the same.
That's the point.
There is sharing within the island.
Yes. Yes.
Across histories only before the end. Correct.
So, for instance, there are people who could be employed and unemployed for 2 periods, and next period they lose their job, so they have to go to this island. And people who stay unemployed, they are still on this island, and I pool all the resources of this guy in this island to share it. And exactly this is the approximation error compared to the true Biolay model, the pooling.
I think when you say pooling, there's, one leads is saying he comes in with a different level of asset, I come in with a different level of asset in pooling. That's not what you mean. What you mean is saying you're assuming that I have the same level of asset.
No.
No, what I'm confused about is take that problem. No, forget, just take this problem.
Yes,
What is A0 in a particular island?
whatever you want.
No, but you have, the way you've written it, the planner is choosing A0. I don't understand that.
No, because with my timing,
A minus 1 is.
So A minus 1 is supplied to you.
yes.
Definitely
So,
people that
I agree with that, so I understand that program. But in, now A minus 1 is going to be a complex function of the history of aggregate shocks.
no, let me, so A, with my definition, usually you put 80 minus 1 here. So I put 80. That's why he's choosing 80, which is the end of period T.
Okay, fine.
A0 in island, it's in first period 0, and after the aggregate shock, is whatever you want. You can have any distribution of wealth in any island.
No. I'm saying I have to give that to you for you to be able to solve this problem.
Correct.
Now, if I wanted to use this to solve, for a general economy, I would need to know what A minus 1 is after some
No, because this will converge the long run toward a stationary distribution that will not depend on the initial distribution. as in Bewley model. Bewley model, whatever the initial distribution, you converge to the Bewley distribution, which is independent of the initial condition. We know that in the Bewley economy. So initial distribution there's nothing deep about that.
What I'm confused about is your answer to Chris's question, which is, are you assuming that people who show up on an island, anything that happened to them before t minus n, literally doesn't matter? When I say literally doesn't matter, as in all I need to know about them is what happened to them in the last n periods.
Yes.
Is that your statement?
Yes.
That's more than pooling, because that's basically saying their asset holdings from before are assumed to be, you know.
No, they are assumed.
In terms of the
Go back to the programming problem. Nikki, look, it's very straightforward. You look at that equation. Go back to the programming problem.
Yes.
That I understand.
Go back to the programming problem. There. You see that last equation? That's a constraint on the plan. It says that assets in island N consist of all the assets that were held in previous islands. It has to be pooled. So think about it as that's a constraint. The planner is forced to pool. Even if he might not want to, he's forced to.
Yes.
So, but then just as one clarification, if n goes to infinity, then this looks like a complete market economy.
Correct.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. That's the earlier discussion we were having. That's the earlier discussion.
But
It's
if
not.
you pull
So,
all the assets.
let me now.
More individual.
So many more types.
See, what's happening? No.
Let me.
Mathematically, what's going on is as n goes to infinity, the number of islands, so to speak, is going to infinity.
Yes.
Also, at a faster rate.
Very quickly, that's the point.
Faster.
Very quickly.
The fraction of people in an island is embedded. It's that.
20? Okay, let me try. I want to think. Right, no, so I will be a little bit fast, but although it will be fast, it will help for this issue. So let me now, so forget about aggregate shock to simplify things, and let's think about islands and think about the Bewley model in the decentralized thing. So this is a typical Bewley problem written recursively. So people, they have some wealth, they have possibly a shock which is affecting their productivity, and they choose how much to consume and save, and this is their continuation value. This is a Bewley problem. The only thing that I had is that here it depends on the last period, n+1, instead of only the current status, because the state has make a transfer to any agent lump sum according to the last n+1 period. So compared to the standard Bewley model, this is the only deviation. The state has this transfer, which is dependent on the history, n+1 history. So, what we do in the paper is that we show this horrible thing. First, there's a balance transfer such that the solution of the Bewley model is exactly the same as the solution of my island economy. Why? Because what is my island doing? My island doing is pooling resources for agents coming to this island according to where they come from. This is what transfer will do. n+1 is because where they come from. So I will take the resources of people where they come from, and I will generate an initial period of wealth, which will be the same for n period. So I have to look where they come from, and I give the same wealth to all agents in the period. So this is a construction that allows me to replicate my island economy. And then I have a convergence proof which shows that this tends towards 0 when n tends toward infinity. So that I can closer and closer, the additional insurance given by my pooling within the island tends toward 0 when n tends toward infinity. What is the convergence proof? What is this condition? And it will be intuitive to help about the structure of incomplete markets.
But the number of islands is uncountable. It's going to be difficult to take this.
It's countable.
No, the number of islands is uncountable. 2 to the infinity is uncountable.
Here I have the finite number of islands. Huh?
No,
But
no.
that's-
2 to the n.
In the limit,
It's converging to
It's converging.
But
It-
anyway.
it's converging.
There is a very delicate limit.
Yes. So, we will discuss about that. That's a technicality about the topology of the distribution of wealth in the underlying Bewley economy that we discuss, but let's go fast on that. The point is that if my statement is true, when n tends to 1 infinity, I can get closer and closer to the true value function. So if the following assumption hold, which is this one. If I give you $1 in all states of the world, you save less than $1. If I give you $1, you do not save more than $1
In all states.
in all states of the world. So this is true for any model, I know. So what's the implication? It means that the policy rule in terms of saving is a contraction. So if you have initial difference in wealth, if you live the same history for a long enough period of time, because it's a contraction, the initial difference in wealth will decrease as an impact on your saving decision in all period, and you can make it as close as 0 as you want, because the saving rule is a contraction. And this is a key difference between complete and incomplete market economy. In complete market economy, in Bewley model, the saving rule is a contraction. So that's where you get to our result. Okay? It was, I hope, an intuition.
You had emphasized the fact that you have uniform convergence. The kappa is independent. That's important.
Yes. 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 It's. I think we could make it even stronger, but
If a sequence of kappa ends is converging to 1,
no, this would not work. Correct. It has. That's a good point. It has to be in uniform convergence out of 0. Okay, good. Now, we can do the Ramsey problem. So once you have swallowed that and you trust me, you have to trust Albert, and it's not that difficult. So we have a lot of islands, a lot of agents moving across island, but I will write the problem in after-tax prices, as is Chamley. I will write a big Lagrangian with Euler equation, as in Marset and Marimon. I will derive first-order condition, and that's it. And I have my first-order condition. What is nice is the following thing. So now let me go into the economic aspect about what are the trade-offs the planner is facing. I have 10 minutes, perfect. So now let me, if you want, show you the planner problem. So this is the horrible object. So there's the first planner allocating resources across island, and there's the second planner, I call it the government, which is setting distorting taxes to maximize the welfare of the first planner. That's a game between two planners. So my government will choose the post-tax interest rate, the post-tax real wage, public debt, and it will affect anything on mine economy, but this is a finite dimension vector. And the government has this budget constraint, as in Chamley. So you see that he's issuing some debt. He has to repay debt, transfer. He understands the first order condition on all islands. So there are as many equations here as islands. On top of that, he understands the financial market equilibrium, which is that the total saving is invested either in capital or in the public bond, and the credit constraint. So this is the big problem I have to solve, and I can solve it. So there's a lot of equations instead of one, but you do a sum, and you introduce the Lagrange coefficient on this budget of the state, the Lagrange coefficient on the Euler equation. You rewrite the Lagrangian as we do in a recursive contract. So you put Lagrangian in the objective of the planner. It's what we use from Albert and Ramon paper, and you can derive first order condition of the planner. The key thing about the first order condition of the planner is this object. So what is this object? This object, the psi, is for the planner how much he thinks it's good to give 1 unit of good in this island. So if I give 1 unit of good in island En, so this is the marginal utility of the guy on this island. But if I transfer 1 unit of good in period t in the future, this will affect the incentive to save for period t minus 1 to period t, and the incentive to save for period t to period t plus 1. So this is a correction of the incentive to save that the planner is understanding. And you can rewrite all first order conditions with this psi only. For my knowledge, this was not done in the paper, but in the literature, but it simplifies a lot. For instance, the transfer. What is the first order condition for the transfer? So this is the first order condition for the transfer. If I transfer 1 unit of good to all agents in all islands, the cost is mu t, which is the cost for the budget constraint of the state. And what is the gain? The gain is a small increase in psi on all agents, all islands. And so on and so on. So we can rewrite all first order conditions as a function of psi everywhere to play with it. Okay? And when we play with it, we get this theorem. So this theorem, I think, is a new result. I want to say it clearly because if it's wrong, it will help us as a literature. First, we focus on the steady state. So there's a debate about is the steady state a global maximum in this problem. That's the point raised by Straub and Werning. Recent paper by Chen and Wang say it's true. So the steady state is a good, there's no convergence towards zero wealth. There's a paper by Shari discussing with. But here in this setup, the steady state is a good approximation. Good. In the steady state, we know that the marginal productivity is pinned down of capital by the discount factor. We know that since Ayagari 95. Because the state is using public debt to smooth consumption, and the state has no idiosyncratic risk. So he has the Euler equation, the state. So the Euler equation of the state, which is a representative agent, pin down marginal productivity capital as in the representative agent. The second result is, the key one is this one. The tax on capital is proportional with a positive constraint to the average value of mu, which is the Lagrange coefficient on the budget constraint of agent in the island. So, what does that mean? If I do this model and I put a borrowing constraint which is below the natural borrowing limit, I know that the credit constraint will not bind for any agent. So, by assumption, so capital tax will be 0. It's not a result, it's almost an assumption. And this is a framework, for instance, used by Bandari, Golosov, Sargent, Evans. They set the borrowing.
It confuses the hell out of me. I mean, I assume that there is a natural borrowing limit, otherwise this problem is not well defined.
Correct.
So with the borrowing limit, the standard result in Rao's paper is that that there's too much asset accumulation if you didn't have a tax system.
No, if.
Okay, all right. Go ahead. Keep going.
So, this is key. I think that it's not incomplete market by itself which generates excess accumulation. It's the fact that you anticipate the borrowing limit to bind in some state, actually bind in some state of the world which is generating excess asset accumulation. That's the key thing, that the credit constraint has to bind in equilibrium to have excess asset accumulation, and you tax it. Even if you have incomplete market, but the...
No, but even if it's a natural borrowing limit, it is going to bind in some state of the world. Not that it's going to bind per se, but the fact that it's there. Okay, so two observations. If you drop any constraint on the problem, then we know the problem has no solution. What's the
Correct.
optimal thing to do? Consume everything, Ponzi scheme your way.
Correct.
Forever. And so therefore, once you put in that constraint on the problem, the issue is not whether it's binding or not. Once you cannot follow that policy, and I thought that was sort of the central point of Rao's paper, is that the real interest rate is lower than the pure rate of time fraction.
Yes, but it does not mean that the planner wants to tax this excess saving. It's a result by Davila and so on and so on. You can have an interest rate.
So what you're saying is that
It's constraint
because I have
efficient.
these lump sum transfers, it's got to be the lump sum transfers that are doing it. That goes back to what Albert was saying. Because Rao didn't have lump sum transfers. It's got to be the lump sum transfers that are doing it.
I can,
doing enough to undo the overaccumulation issue.
correct, that's the key thing. When you assume lump sum
Some transfers then are
No.
contingent on the type cost on the type cost.
No. Lump sum transfer,
Lump sum for
yes.
everyone.
If you can make it time specific, you reproduce the complete market allocation. You provide insurance and you undo in complete market. So it's, you give the same thing to all agents. But
Not with heterogeneous data.
I think with heterogeneous agent.
Dr. Villa was here. You should explain it to us.
Yeah, yes.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
No, but after, so I think it helps a little bit, but I understand that I must spend more time to explain the difference with Davila and paper. But this is clearer for me now, because of this result, the difference between the some key papers in the literature. That is not in complete market, it's binding credit constraint in some set of the world, which is making capital tax positive. So after, in 1 minute, it's not that interesting. We apply it. So we use quarterly calibration. Idiosyncratic risk is an unemployment risk, TFP shock. And the key thing I want to know is what is N? If N is 10,000, it's too big. If N is 2, we are good. It happens that, so I take standard parameters. It happens that the capital tax is positive, and the key thing, we take N equal to 8. Okay, 8. It means we have 256 agents. So, how can we see it's a good approximation? I compute the pooling error. So the pooling error gives me the deviation from the true Bewley. And I computed the standard deviation as a proportion of labor income. And you see that for N equal 1, employed and unemployed, 2 islands, the pooling error is huge. But it decreases quite fast with N, and it's 1% of income, this pooling, the standard deviation. Another way to see that, we can compute the optimal fiscal system for different N, and you see that it converges rapidly to a value which is close to constant when N equal to 8. So in this problem, we do not need a huge N. And a couple of hundred agents is enough to have a very good understanding of what's going on. So the key thing is that we can compute IRF. So, and you see that when there's a positive TFP shock, the planner actually decreases public debt. It decreases public debt for agents to invest a lot in capital to benefit from the TFP shock. And how do I decrease public debt? By a huge spike in capital. So capital tax will be very, very volatile. Labor tax almost flat. For the agent to invest into THP when it's necessary and to disinvest what is not necessary. So that's the dynamic counterpart of Davila and others. And second moment, and I'm done. So I think, so here we have this methodology and we apply we think the first simple thing is optimal fiscal policy in Crossell and Smith type of environment to understand that. But obviously you can introduce many things, sticky stuff, certain matching, multiple assets. The thing is that this is orthogonal to the truncation and to the optimal contract we derive. So we can do many things, and we are focusing on now more dirty macro stuff to match the data.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much.